As we mentioned, today is Juneteenth, which commemorates the end of slavery in the United States. On June 19th, 1865, the last group of enslaved people in America were freed. CBS News special correspondent James Brown has the history behind today.
Everyone say Juneteenth.
Juneteenth.
For the last 3 years, Shantea and Michael McIntyre have celebrated Juneteenth with their 4 kids in their mostly white California neighborhood. What is it about Juneteenth that you want people to know?
It's not just a black holiday. It really is a celebration of freedom, and that's what America is about. And so if you celebrate the 4th of July, you absolutely should celebrate Juneteenth as well.
And everyone just dropped all their tools.
The McIntyres invite their neighbors not only to celebrate, but to use it as a teaching moment.
We reached out to the parents, let them know what we wanted to celebrate. All of the parents were okay with that, and they sent the kids down here. A couple of the parents came as well.
I got text messages from the parents and said, "Thanks for teaching my kid about that cool holiday," and they can't stop talking about Juneteenth.
Juneteenth stands for June 19th, the day in 1865 when Union General Gordon Granger finally arrived in Galveston, Texas, to announce the emancipation of slaves. Texas had kept approximately 250,000 black people enslaved for 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation became law in 1863. And the man who signed it, President Abraham Lincoln, had been assassinated 2 months before Granger arrived.
Can you imagine? So what Juneteenth is, June 19th, is the acknowledgement and, yes, commemoration that there were slaves that lasted 2 more years, and for them, it was a lifetime.
Texas Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee has been pushing to make Juneteenth a national holiday for 2 decades.
The potential of having this national holiday opens a whole world of discussion for America, a whole reckoning with her racism and the systemic racism that permeates the nation.
Where do you sense legislatively we are? Are we poised to see this come across the finish line?
I do. We are just very pleased at the number of co-sponsors and members who are interested in being supportive. In the resolution that we already introduced, we have 204 co-sponsors. It's delayed freedom, but it is the only recognition of the original sin of this nation. So Juneteenth is an ability to tell the story of slavery.
African Americans haven't waited for national recognition to celebrate Juneteenth. Since 1866, parades and barbecues have been a staple of black communities from Houston and San Antonio to Chicago and Little Rock.
They have some really big Juneteenth celebrations, and I would love to go out to one of those because, I mean, there's thousands of people out there.
Back in California, the McIntyres feel their small celebration is one way to bridge the racial divide during this tense moment in our history.
My husband and I, we took our children to a peaceful protest, and I found myself walking with a fist in the air. And there was a movement that when I looked around, it wasn't just black people holding their hands up. And so that's why I feel like there is some momentum around Juneteenth.
And for more on Juneteenth, I'm joined by Jamelle Bouie. He is a CBS News political analyst as well as an opinion columnist for the New York Times. Welcome, Jamelle. Great to have you with us. Talk about the special impact of Juneteenth this year, given the demonstrations we've been seeing all month long following George Floyd's death.
I think that this specific year and this specific time, Juneteenth does carry broader meaning because it is a reminder, the holiday itself is a reminder of not just freedom, but the distance between the freedom that is sort of the freedom that we say people have and the freedom that they actually have, right? Since the holiday emerges out of the fact that enslaved Africans in Texas aren't aware of the Emancipation Proclamation until 2 years after it's given. I think in this moment where we're seeing millions of people wake up to the distance between what is promised and what is available, Juneteenth as a holiday literally embodies that tension and that distance. And so I think it just, for that reason alone, speaks to people in a way that it may not have in previous years.
That is a stunning fact, and I think it is one that many Americans were not aware of, that slavery in this country did not end with the Emancipation Proclamation. And you wrote a piece in Slate over 5 years ago calling Juneteenth the Black American holiday everyone should celebrate but doesn't. I feel like, this is history that everyone should read but somehow doesn't know. Why are those details, do you think, not broadly known and understood across America?
That is the subject for an entire book, I think. It goes back to how Americans remembered the end of the Civil War in the first place. For almost a century after the war's end, Americans, and here is mostly white Americans, remembered a war that was about brother against brother, a mistaken war, a valiant war, a memory of the war that really downplayed the role of slavery in that war. And it's only been in the last 50 years or so that we've seen a more mainstream recognition among historians, among the general public, of the centrality of slavery, both to the war and the centrality of the abolition of slavery to the aftermath. And I think also what's missing in public conversations about slavery even now is a recognition of the extent to which slavery wasn't something, or rather emancipation wasn't something that was bestowed upon the enslaved. From the beginning of American slavery in the 17th century to the American Revolution to the Civil War, enslaved people and free blacks were struggling for their freedom the entire time. And it's the actions of those enslaved people and free blacks that helps facilitate the conditions that produce emancipation during the Civil War.
And you also make a point in your article that, the Civil War was the first time in this nascent country's history that those ideals that this country was supposedly founded on were really tested. And so we should be celebrating the fact that those ideals about humanity, emerged victorious, at least in word, if not always on deed, indeed.
That's right. I think a thing that it's important to remember about the Civil War is in the moment, in 1861 and 1862, no one alive knew how it was going to end up. No one knew that slavery was going to be abolished. No one knew that the Union was going to win. And in that moment, both domestically and internationally, there is real question about what a Confederate victory would mean, not just for slavery, but really for the entire project of democracy. The U.S. was pretty much the only democracy of its kind at the time. And this was seen in an international perspective as a test of whether democracies could actually survive in the long term. And so when you think about the war, then when you think about the fact that it was freed African Americans joining the Union Army that helped win the war, that it was enslaved people in the field stopping working, right, sort of essentially leaving the plantations that helped cripple the Confederate war effort. When you think about the ways in which Black Americans in this period helped ensure Union victory, then what you're really looking at is something that didn't just guarantee their freedom, but guaranteed the survival of democracy for the entire world.
And that is something that we should all celebrate. So what would you like to see happen going forward to honor this day and to honor, the celebration of those ideals that emerged victorious at the end of the Civil War?
Well, I take the celebration part of this seriously. I don't think Juneteenth should be a somber holiday. People should have fun. They should have food. They should spend time with family and friends. But they should do so also while trying to educate themselves, while learning about not just the Civil War, but learning about the experiences of enslaved people, learning about what freed people did in the aftermath of the war to help try to build the post-war South into a democracy. Learning about this history, which I think is so key to understanding not just our present moment, but really understanding the United States as a society in the 20th and 21st century, I think should be part of any Juneteenth celebration. And as someone who is a little old-fashioned in the sense that I think civics education is extremely valuable and we should have more of it, I would love to see communities, states, cities, or whatnot, and use this as an opportunity really to educate their citizens, their residents, about sort of their particular place in this history.
Well, Jamelle Bouie, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate all your knowledge on this topic and sharing the history with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.